Hi there, it's me, Jordan Van Haslo. Welcome to Jordan Van Haslo and Friends live on Hot 702.5 FM Las Vegas. Let's get on with the show. Well, I'm here today with a new friend, actor, writer, podcaster, the fantastic Todd Connor. Hi, Todd. How are you?
Hey, Jordan. Good. I'm doing great.
Awesome. How is Brazil? So you're still in Brazil, right?
I am in Rio right now. I'm in Botafogo, part of Rio, and it's very hot, very sunny today, which is, thinking Christmas time, and it's not your first thought, but it's perfectly blue sky and very, very hot, and but it's just starting to turn, summer here.
Yeah.
It was raining almost the entire month of November, at least where I was, and then came back to Rio after that. I was outside. I was down in the south of the state, and then came back, and it was like a switch had been flipped, and just the most fantastic days. In fact, I'm still thinking I might even go to the beach today.
You're making me really, really jealous.
Sorry, I know.
Stuck here in New York, and and it's so funny because the exact opposite happened. Right, like a couple of weeks ago, it was like still in the 70s, and it was lovely. People are sitting outside eating, and then all of a sudden there was this switch, and it's like, wait a second, it's like 40 degrees. What happened?
Yeah, I know it happens. It's just there's this sudden snap. But I saw some pictures of New York and the leaves on the ground and the trees in the park, and I missed it. I mean, I that's one of my favorite parts of the year in New York is Christmas time and the fall. I mean, the fall is my favorite time.
Have you seen photos of the Rockefeller Center tree? Because I don't know if you were following some of that drama. When they first put it up, it looked kind of like Charlie Brown's Christmas tree. Like it was missing branches, and it was like, oh, what are they gonna do? But they started to light it, and now they seem to they were able to get it all together.
So it's like Linus came in and did his number. He put his comfy blanket around the bottom, and it just blossomed.
Exactly.
That's
exactly.
Fantastic.
Do you go down to Brazil a lot? Because I know your podcast, Cariorker, is all about Brazilian culture and all of that jazz. Do you go down to Brazil a lot?
I have been coming here. I think this is my 11th year, and I can't remember the number of times. It might be 9 times I've come down here. I used to try to come every year, but it's been 4 years since I've been here, since the last time I was here. But the
I think I might have lost. There we go. So I'm here. So it's been 4 years since you were last. It's been 4 years since you were last in Brazil.
You know what I'm going to do? I am going to put my headphones on so I can hold this away from my face. I think maybe that's what happened. Okay, wow, now I can hear you for real.
Ah.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Now I'm going to be paranoid. I mean, it's going to be like some sort of Betty Davis movie or something, I'm paranoid. No, you're not listening to me.
So you were saying you go to Brazil every year, but it's been 4 years since the last time you've been.
Yeah, I was down here 4 years ago, and I stayed in a school in the southern part of the state of Rio de Janeiro, and I wrote my master's thesis. And I hadn't had a chance to come back. I was going to come back a
What
year
was your
earlier.
thesis about? Was this an MFA, a theater MFA?
This is an MFA it was a creative writing, MA in creative writing from Wilkes University. Excuse me, Wilkes University. And I wrote a screenplay, which was based on some stories I had been telling for the last 20 years based on some Roman mythology. And I had the idea to turn it into a modern screenplay, and that took a lot of thinking to do. But I got away from it all and went down there and wrote that, and came back. And this is the first chance to get back. And I find a lot of inspiration here. It's so as you might guess, it's so unpredictable and so stimulating in ways that I have not been used to. That everything is interesting. I mean, sometimes it's, a little difficult to deal with. It's kind of a polyeconomic society. I mean, you can find very rich and very poor. You can find very hot and very, chilly things. I mean, it's very interesting place. And so I found it to be very inspiring. And that's kind of what brought me back after my first trip here, which was about 11 years ago.
So you went down, so had you always, I've never been to Brazil, but everyone I know who has gone fall in love with it. And they're like, oh my goodness, I want to retire there. Oh my goodness, it's just the most magical place on earth. So what got you down there in the first place? Was it just the idea for this script and you're like, oh, it should be set in Brazil. Let's go down to Brazil and check it out? Or how did it even?
This miracle happened. I got money back from the government one year on my taxes. That was the miracle. And I said, at the time I wanted, I was kind of feeling like I needed to kind of get out of myself, and I was in touch with someone online and an online friendship and from Brazil. And I thought, you know what, this money in my left hand, this conversation in my right hand, those two kind of go together. And so I said, I've got 6 days. And so I said, for 6 days, I'm going down. And I came down, and it was a very bold thing to do because I've always loved Brazilian music and always been very, very curious, thinking, I'll never get to go. And I just said, to hell with it, I'm going. And I went. And as soon as I got back, I said, I am going to learn the language. And I said, I'm coming back. It's not just going to be a touristic thing. I'm going to make this a project. And because it was so fascinating, I thought, how long has this been going on? It's like a whole different country down here.
Who would have thunk it?
Who would have thunk? But it's very interesting. Brazil and America are very similar in many, many ways. I mean, they're almost the same exact landmass outside of, say, Alaska, being included in the U.S. They're both colonial situations of a very different kind. One's Catholic, one was essentially Protestant. One was very hot and muggy. The other one was very cold and deadly, like in Jamestown. And I thought, wow, these are incredibly different. It's like seeing an alternative universe with it coming from the same similar time. But the thing that is the hook, and as always has been, is the music. And if anyone is a musician listening to this, including you, it is worth the time to come down and just absorb kind of what music is like down here, because everyone plays music. You find out there's a very famous guitar player, and I don't even know his name, but I listened to him on a show on maybe NPR or something like that. He was a dentist for 50 years, and then he decides he's going to play the guitar, and someone helps him, and he's like this amazing guitar player. People saying, oh, he's the best guitar player in Brazil. I can't even remember his name. There are many, many good guitar players in Brazil of many, a number of different styles. But it has a very different sort of feel, and the rhythm and the connection to African rhythms is really so much more organic here. And I can't explain it in a very, academic way or anything like that.
Right.
But it's just so immediate. Like you could go, one year I was here, I stayed in the hills of Santa Teresa, and at night you just hear this just echoing through the hills all night long. I don't know if you heard that, but this deep sort of bass, big samba drum, and I can't remember what time of year it was, but I did get to come when they were preparing for the carnival, the big samba schools, and I did get to go to a samba school, and it was so far out there for me, even though I knew and I liked bossa nova. The whole landscape of it is so deep. You pull back a layer and you find another layer, and then you find another layer. And when I did the podcast, I don't know if that's on this or that got discarded, but I did the podcast. My first season of the podcast, I featured the work in and around the stories that I recorded, all in English, of this Brazilian writer named Machado de Assis, I wanted to have a contemporary of the music of that time, which is the late 19th century. And there's an artist, a composer, the first female composer in Brazil and probably in, the Americas, named Chiquinha Gonzaga. And she was an incredible force of nature, very unlike anything you'd expect. She was a single woman. She raised a son alone, and she composed endlessly. She was from a very rich family, and she, was a wild child in a way, and even in the 19th century. And she just wrote tons of very interesting music. And very big in the history of choro. Choro, which is style of music here, which is predates bossa nova by far, and is it's probably the most pervasive music, I think, in Rio, that you hear people playing choro all the time. And bossa nova has a very different place in that. But it's something I'm learning of. I'm by no means an expert on any of this. I just know what I like and what sort of stimulates my interest, and
you just go with it.
Absolutely.
That's the way to do it. How did this? So Cariorker. I love the title. I love the artwork, and I love the just the podcast in general. How did that even come about? Because you're now on your you just began your second season, right?
Right. Cariorker is a mashup of Carioca, which is someone who is a resident of Rio. It's called a Carioca, named after the river, the Cariocca River, and then the Yorker, which is the New Yorker. So the Carioca and the New Yorker come together to become the Cariorker. And it's just a way that I can justify. I wanted to find a way to do my work and justify coming to Rio and make it part of my creative interest. And so I am. Sorry.
I was laughing because I think I remember reading an interview with Woody Allen, and that's kind of like what he's always done. It's like any place he wants to go, he's like, okay, I'll just write a script in that place, and I get to spend all summer shooting.
Well, yeah,
in that particular location.
Who can afford? Especially if you're an artist and you're not, some wealthy artist. You only have so much time. Like the old saying says, it's ars long vita brevis in Latin. There's art takes a long time to master, and we have so little time to do it in, I think, is what that really boils down to. And it's like, I'm not going to do my creative stuff and then go on vacation to this fascinating place and just kind of for kicks. That doesn't make sense to me as a creative person. That's what an accountant should do. Okay. But an artist, if you go to some place as stimulating as Brazil can be, Rio in particular, it's just every day is something to discover, and curiosity and creativity are just, you can't separate them. And I think that's a great way to be. It's very interesting. You should mention Woody Allen, though. Woody Allen is one of the people who cites this writer that I translated in the first season, Machado de Assis. He cites him as one of his influences.
Oh,
and
really?
You can read Machado's stories and you go, wow, I see that right away. Because Woody Allen was the quintessential New York writer. And he wrote, you think of Woody Allen, you think of New York.
Mm-hmm.
You think of Machado de Assis, you think of Rio de Janeiro, at least in the 19th century. He never left Rio, like Woody Allen didn't leave New York for a long time. And every story he talks about has a location, and he's very specific about where it is and what corner it's on. And not only that, but Machado de Assis was kind of ahead of his time in many ways. His imagination was so fanciful. He wrote kind of romances, I guess you'd call them now, and mainly his audience was women at the time. So they were about affairs going on in Rio and that sort of thing. And then he had a turn where he turned into kind of a realist. And then he had another kind of side of him that was very fanciful and ironic. He's known for his irony. I mean, Woody Allen is not really ironic. He's more funny, but Machado is funny too, but a very dark sort of irony in his work, but very funny. And if you listen to some of the stories, you can see his sense of humor start to emerge. And I mean, for example, a good comparison between Woody and Machado is Woody Allen did Mighty Aphrodite, and he has these little vignettes in Mighty Aphrodite where he shows these great tragedians, you know, back in ancient Greece, and then they start dancing to, you know, 1920s New York music or something like that. I can't remember it exactly, but it's this very sort of fanciful, who could imagine that sort of crazy thing happening? Now, one of the stories that Machado has, which I absolutely love, is where a priest goes into a church. He hears something inside this church and the light is on in there. It's this strange, milky kind of light. It's all just like glowing. And he walks in and he sees all the saints that were on the, you know, around the walls. They've come off the wall and they're sitting on the altars in front of their little area of the church. And they're sitting around talking, you know, and it's like they're doing shop talk at the end of the day saying, oh, yes, I saw this poor miserable sinner. She came and talked to me for hours about this and that and the other. And this poor priest is frightened to death and listening to all of these saints talking about all the petitions of the day. It's very fanciful and very modern in a way. And finally, he gets down to the one big story of the evening when he's listening to this, and that becomes the sort of the crux of the story. But these fanciful notions. Another one is about a canary that begins to talk to he's called an ornithologist or something, someone who studies birds, and you know, it's delightful stuff. And you know, it's like these little hidden treasures that for me are fascinating to be able to discover, you know, and they have kind of a mystique to them because I didn't set out to find them. I mean, those are those things, you know, like you find something on the street that was, you know, left there or dropped, and you pick it up and you go, oh my God, people have been walking over this for 20 years and I found it.
Yeah.
That's kind of the way I feel about not only Machado, but about all of Brazil. And it's by just the good fortune of not being aware of so much of it. And it's been a wonderful place to just reacquaint myself with a sense of discovery, which I think sometimes, you know, you get involved in your, you know, the trenches of the profession of acting or entertainment or theater or whatever it might be, and you feel like you're just going over the same ground every time. You need
just
that
going
sort
through
of
the motions.
you need that unexpected knock to just kind of knock you off balance. And it's as you try to regain your balance that you discover something about it.
Totally.
And I think that's what Brazilian musicians have done for a long, long time. You know, I mean, obviously the tremendous amount of slaves that were brought here in the passage. Out of that comes this incredible tradition of music, and it's so passionate and emotional.
Well, going back to what you were saying, it's so important to just always keep your eyes open, right? Because like you said, you get into the mundane of just the day-to-day, the grind of, you know, your day-to-day life, the grind of the business, right? You're like sending out, you know, pitches, sending out, you know, whatever, if you're self-taping auditions or whatever. And it's so easy to just kind of like get into this zone of just where you're just laser focused on what's directly in front of you. And you know, but keeping your eyes open, you know, you never know where inspiration, right? Like we'll just, you know, you look up and you see this amazing cornice of a building and you're like, oh my goodness, that looks so beautiful. And then you start, you know, you go down like a Wikipedia hole and you're like, oh my goodness, the story behind this and what was happening in that time and the people who were, you know, involved in this style. Like you never know where inspiration's gonna appear.
You described it exactly right. That's exactly how it is. You know, I think if you find that place where you're going to be kind of, you know, knocked off your feet just a little bit. I mean, this is a great place for that, and it is for me.
Yeah.
And
Were you, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but were
No,
you a
no, no.
writer first, or were you an actor first, or were you just a curious person first, which kind of led you to both?
I think I was an actor first. I mean, I was someone who, wanted to wear a mask. I found that was my, like Oscar Wilde says, if you want to find out who someone really is, give them a mask and they'll tell you. And I felt it's seriously, it's a strange paradox. And that's what I wanted to do. And I never thought I was clever enough to write stories. And I still, feel like I'm a student. And that's why Machado was such a good storyteller to learn from, and to do it from a translation point of view, which translated all these stories, have to go through it word by word and what he's trying to say. What does that sentence do in the story? That's a lot, and then to act them as well.
That's really interesting, because like the translation work, I think is really difficult. And I would imagine, I've never done translation work myself, but I would imagine there's a very heavy burden on you, right? Because, yes, you want to kind of go word for word and say, well, this is exactly what he's saying, but then you have to also interpret it, right? Because there's figures of speech that don't necessarily directly translate. And so you almost are like, the kind of like how this story is received in this new language is really kind of in your hands.
Exactly. What it really reminds me of is, I've done, my fair share of Shakespeare, and you really, that's supposedly my native language. As it is all our native language in English-speaking countries, right? It's essentially thought by academics to be the modern beginning of modern English with Shakespeare, right? Well, you still have to go through and say, I understand what that sentence says, literally, but what function does it play in this?
But what does it mean?
What does it mean? What is this meaning? And there are a lot of things. And I translated, I'll tell you, a lot of the acting process. If I were to get these stories in English, I would be tempted. I would not have to dig in to the meaning of the lines as much as I've had to as a translator. And I don't even know if I would probably go back and translate them very differently now. The more I know, and to me, it was the exercise was to
You're losing.
Get it
I think
done.
You're breaking up a little bit. You there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Say that again. Yeah, you blocked out for a second. You said you didn't have to, and with like doing the English in terms of digging in, you didn't have to dig in as much as you do, and then that's when I lost you.
That's correct. To have to dig into the meaning of the language and the words, and you go, for instance, there's there's a title of a story, which is a kind of a nonsense phrase. It's a quotation of what someone says. And even in the story itself, the guy says, I don't know what he meant by that. And I had to come up with a decision of what he's really trying to say. And basically it was a crime story, a courtroom drama about a guy criticizing a petty criminal. And he said, this guy should be sent to jail. He put himself at risk for only like $400 or something like that. And he says, if you're going to get filthy dirty, he says, if you're going to go that far,
if you're going to commit the crime, commit it.
Exactly. And so this person on a jury was saying this about this poor guy who had been caught stealing from a bank. And he says, if you're going to go filthy, get filthy. So that's kind of the way I translate it. And it resembles nothing of what some of the other translations are. And some of them really didn't so I wanted to give it this kind of New York edgy version. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. I'm here.
Yeah, and so it's like to get filthy rich. Now, literally in Portuguese, that doesn't make any sense. It has something to do with getting dirty, sujo. I can't remember the exact. So I thought, God, what do we, but when we have this phrase, get filthy rich, so to give it the emotional impact, you have to do it. But see, in doing that translative process, you're doing all the acting work. You're doing all the acting analysis. You know, if I were to get a text in English, for example, I'd have to break it down, and I could skate if I needed to. You know, people do that all the time, especially with things like Shakespeare and Chekhov and the classics and so on. They can skate because it's Shakespeare. You know, everyone knows Shakespeare and they think they know exactly what it means. But if you have to dig into that language and you're stuck until you figure out what that sentence is doing there, and you dig and you dig and you dig and you might set it aside and take a week or a few days and go, what is he trying to say? Now, I had to come up with something because the challenge I set out for myself was to do a new one every 2 weeks, which was a lot for me. and so in a way, they're slightly adaptations, because, you know, you see all the time when someone takes an old story and then they turn it into something completely else and they release it as a major motion picture and it's nothing like the original story and they've taken liberties and so on. In a sense, I didn't try to do that, but I think the stories that I ended up telling have their own integrity. An academic might look at them and say, oh, well, you know, that's not exactly what it meant. But all the Brazilians that I've spoken to who have done it have enjoyed them, and that, who speak English, that is, have enjoyed them. And that makes me feel good because I think they have their own integrity, and they also are reflective of me as a New Yorker, because I did as much as I can to kind of make the language fit, even though it's very elegant Portuguese. I did try when I could to make it kind of sound good to a New Yorker's ear, or a Yankee ear, so to speak, and to kind of have an affinity for it. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm here. I'm listening to every word you're saying. So no, I'm here. Can you not hear me?
No, I could.
I'm here. Yeah, I've heard everything you've said.
I was just traumatized by that first time that I gave this long-winded speech. And there's no one there.
It's amazing. It's like technology. It's amazing as wonderful as technology is, and how it's like helps us do just this. The fact that you're in Brazil and I'm in New York and we're having a wonderful conversation. At the same time, it always finds a way to be lacking when it's most inconvenient.
Yeah, I know. It does condition everything. I mean, there's something to be said to the difficulty too, that, you know, you begin to appreciate more when it does work and whatever.
Totally. So I'm curious about your background. Like where did you grow up, and how did you get into the arts and into writing and into acting?
Wow. It's a long story.
You're like,
you know, it's
wow.
very funny. I was just kind of going over my resume from down here earlier today, my just basic resume, but I grew up in Arkansas, mostly. I wasn't born there, but I moved to the South when I was in the 4th grade or something like that, and spent most of my formative years in the South. And I don't mean that as a bad thing for anyone who's a Southern. I love the South, but I wanted to go to New York, and I was a swimmer growing up. And I eventually discovered that I wanted to wear the mask, as I said. I mean, and so I said, well, because I was a very shy kid, I think, pretty much, and that was my gateway to expressing myself, hidden behind a mask. And it's exactly like that Oscar Wilde quote. It's that you can access those parts of yourself that usually have to remain quiet. You put the mask on and out it comes, without any hesitation. And you go, wow, that's quite powerful. So that seduced me enough to want to, become an actor. I think all my family are science-oriented engineers and scientists and that kind of thing. But I had to be the black sheep and do this other thing.
So was it supported?
And I came to New York and studied.
Was it where you're this is like, oh my goodness, you're, especially like everyone's like a scientist and like STEM and practical, or was it like, oh my goodness, why can't you be like your brother? Or was it like, oh my goodness, finally somebody really interesting?
Well, it's funny. It took a little convincing, and I didn't. It's not that I set out to convince anyone that this is something that I should do. But it took a while. There was it was mostly just not understanding, why would you want to do that? Why would you want to do that? My dad one day came to me when I was young. He's no longer alive now, but he came to me and he says, "So what's it going to be, Todd? Physics or chemistry?" And I was just
You're like,
horrified.
drama.
Yeah, drama. That's the truth.
I'm sorry.
But no. I know. But here's the story. This is kind of the mythic story for myself anyway. I did a show in Iowa at a summer stock theater, and I was playing and talking about a mask. I was in a show called Sleuth. I don't know if you know it, but one character in the second act of the show, after you think that he's died, comes back and he's completely in another character, and I had to put on a fake nose and a wig and a big paunch in my belly, and I had to talk like this, like I was from Scotland Yard, like that, And my father thought I had died in the first act, and then I came back as this guy from Scotland Yard, and my dad says, "Oh, now this actor, pay attention to him. This one's really good." And then I had to take off the mask, the mask and the makeup on stage, and he was flummoxed, and I think that was a huge, turning point. And it's a good scene in a movie if I ever write a movie about that. But it's a good scene in a movie that suddenly he's got egg all over his face because he would never want to encourage this other, this acting thing, for me, but to see this quote unquote other actor. Now that guy, he's
going places.
Yeah. And then I take the stuff off, and of course I heard this, after the show was over. But it was a delight to me to see my dad so taken aback, and another way to get deeper down the rabbit hole of acting, and how much of a thrill that is when you know that people had no idea that was you. And
Oh, I think I lost you again. You there?
Yeah, I'm here. Do you hear me?
Todd?
Yes, I'm here. I'm here. Jordan?
There we go. Yes.
There we go.
So another way to go deeper down the rabbit hole of acting.
Yeah, it's like, wow, it was a thrill to know that you completely fooled your own parents. My mom also thought the same thing. They didn't know it was me. So yeah, and then after that I came to New York, and after I was there in the 80s, and then went to LA and did some stuff. I did my first film down in Texas after I left New York the first time. In fact, the very first movie I did was called Witch Story in English, but in Italian, it was an Italian movie called Streghe, which means witch. And it was just now, after 35 years, released in Italy.
Oh my goodness.
And so now I can do my press junket and sell the movie. Streghe, directed by Alessandro Coppone, who's gone on and have a long, distinguished career of his own. And it was a very formative experience for me, that. And then I did a movie with Renee Zellweger down in Texas called Love in a 45, which is becoming sort of
I totally thought you were going to say Texas Chainsaw Massacre 4.
Oh, no. That, actually. Maybe, I'm not sure. No, she was in that, right?
Right.
Yeah. I can't remember if Love in a 45 was after that or before it. I think it was around that time. It was definitely around that time. But yeah, I did that. I did a scene with her and Gil Bellows, if you know who Gil Bellows is.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, I went to Los Angeles for a few years, and then I decided I wanted to move back to New York. And
you
I
came to your
teaching.
senses and came back to New York.
Yeah, that's right. I swam back upstream. Most people, they go one way down the stream from New York to LA, but I swam back upstream because I missed New York, and I missed the weather. And it was after 9/11, so I felt very, I don't know, I would say guilty, but I felt like I needed to go back out of loyalty for some strange reason.
Yeah, no, I
don't know
understand.
what it was. Yeah, so then I came back and God, what have I done since I've been back? My goodness, it's been such a.
Do you prefer
what I did when I was in
the writing, or is it?
Well, I've been in
sorry,
such,
go for it.
no, I'm just been changing so much. I mean, obviously, for me to come to Brazil, it's another sort of agent of change. I mean, I'm always looking and restless in a way to find something to kind of knock me off my feet and kind of make me lose balance and have to recatch myself. So I think that I've evolved enough that I became more interested in stories and also mythology. I wrote a play. The first play that I wrote was a mythological play based on Beowulf, if you know that old chestnut.
Mm-hmm. I do.
And I just, that sort of hooked me into the notion of the I don't know, the kind of what a story is about, how they're put together and kind of how they affect people and why they affect people. And then I got into this other material from Metamorphoses, if you know that, from Rome. It was a Broadway play a few years ago based on the same material from Roman mythology. And I just, again, I wanted to keep doing what I knew and what was interesting me, as I, poked around in my life, I wanted to make that something professional, and rather than just, spend my days at the bookstore looking at the mythology and wasting that time. No, I wanted to make it part of my professional outlook. And so I translated it from the Latin. Now, I'm not a Latinist. I had some help with that, but it was eventually my text. And I'd really tried to kind of scratch into the substratum of what a story was about. And I really went out into the woods, lit some torches, and told these stories, and I tried to tell these stories in the most primitive way possible, so I could sort of understand what that relationship was like, and people say, oh, I'm a storyteller. Well, I wanted to find out what that really has been like. So I wanted to create an experience that, as people saw it, they knew that's exactly the way, in the same technology, they would have seen it, 4,000 years ago.
Yeah.
And that left a lot of responsibility on me to make the story come across. And so I learned a lot from that. And after that, my decision was to bring it back to New York, because LA is, you live in LA or lived in LA or wherever your domicile is now.
Wherever I happen to be.
It's media. If you don't do something mediated in Los Angeles, if it's not done through a medium of some kind, then people go, well,
it
why
doesn't
are you doing
exist. Exactly,
right,
it doesn't exist.
So I thought, New York is the place for performance, and so I wanted to bring it back here. And I did performances at schools and art centers and a couple theaters and around and about. I mean, I wasn't doing a lot, but I did that for a while, and that brought me back to New York, or at least gave me the reason to come back to New York, or the justification, so to speak. And I've been just becoming a little more interested in the story, and then I wrote I wrote one screenplay when I was out in Los Angeles, and I wanted to do some more writing, and I had done little sketches and things when I was younger, and it just, I think it was just a natural evolution of
progression. Yeah. How long were you in LA? How long were you in LA?
10 years.
Okay, that's a nice
10 years
time. That's a nice chunk of time.
Yeah.
I've been out there now 6 years, almost 7 years, and now I'm basically back in New York. But it's just interesting. How did you find it? And the only reason I ask this is because you seem to be a very thoughtful person. You seem to be a very introspective person, and again, a very curious person. And I don't know that aligns with the the culture of Los Angeles.
I've never heard that before. I've never heard anyone say that to me before. No, I'm kidding. I mean, here's what happened. I was in Dallas and I directed a big production there of a book of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which I adapted for an environmental experience, and it made a lot of money.
That story. Oh my God, as a kid, I loved that story.
Yeah? It's a good
I love
one.
That story.
I put my heart and soul into this production, and it made them a lot of money. I'm not going to name the theater, but it made them a lot of money. And then they closed the program after that. And I felt like, God, I just did this amazing amount of work. And I tried to get into a directing school from that project. I mean, that's what I wanted to really show, but I never got in to present the material. And I didn't get in. And I said, okay, that settles it. No more of this suffering artist routine. I'm going to LA and I'm going to get into TV, like everyone said I should do from the start. I'm going to go be a TV star or whatever. And so I went out to LA and I had met some agents that had encouraged me, and I went out but I ended up going into the museum business and worked at the Getty Museum for a little while. And from there, that's when I got interested in this other mythology, this metamorphosis stuff, because it was so much a part of the artwork in the museum. I thought it was, again, this idea I have, if something interests you in your life, don't just keep it to yourself and go, oh, it just interests me. I think an artist should live those interests out loud. And that's the way, you only really know you get fresh material, you live out your own interests out loud. I mean, I have learned since then that, you're supposed to do a marketing study. You need to find out if there's an audience, if there's a profit in that. Don't do it unless there is. And maybe that's the way most people do it. But for me, it serves a greater purpose for me. I mean, to be creative, you figure out what's interesting to you and live it out loud. That's my feeling. And that's the way the Machado stories came about. I said, you know what, I want to learn Portuguese, but I can't spend my time just learning Portuguese for fun. I mean, I want to make this part of my craft. And he's a storyteller. Yeah. I'm kind of this storyteller type. And, I'm going to make this my work. It's, one's work is important. It's a sacrament to kind of overstate it, but I think it's true.
No, it is. I mean, it's you. It's part of you, and it's the part of you that will live on, right? Whether a lot of people see it, whether it ends up on a shelf in a storage facility, only to be discovered 50 years later, right? Like it's a piece of you.
Well, yeah. I mean, you can. I mean, I don't know if you listened to all of Cecilia's interview, which I. The season 2 episode, the season 1, when she talks about, she says, if you want to make money at your art, you can make money making your art. She says, but that's not the reason to do it. If you're not going to make money, you don't make money. But you do it because you believe in it. You do it because it's yours. Now, it's gambling in a way. I mean, you can't be certain that everyone's going to love what you do, or you hope you make the right decisions. But if art is all about doing marketing surveys and seeing if there's going to be, it's no longer really art. It's becoming something else. It's becoming catering. Really. Don't you think? I mean, it's
absolutely.
There has to be something. The music here, going back to that, it's like these people in these favelas and who came here, if they had anything to make music with, they would make music with it. They didn't do it because it was what they did.
Yeah.
And the fact that it comes along later and makes money, then that's something else. Mm-hmm. But that would not be a condition for anyone to sit around and make music.
So, like the commercialization of it and the success, the commercial success of it is kind of like the icing on the cake, right? Like,
yeah, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's just that shouldn't be the condition that says whether you should do it or not.
Totally.
And if you're holding yourself to that standard, it's a kind of a pressure that you really don't need to put onto yourself. Do it anyway.
Yeah.
If you can, do it anyway. It's a good thing to do.
Totally. So speaking of doing it anyway, so aside from Cariorker, what are you working on now, or what are you working on anything now, or do you kind of like have your eye on like, okay, this is I think what's going to be the next thing I'm going to delve into?
Well, I would love to work with a company of actors. I haven't done that for a while. I mean, I have.
I don't think anybody's going to be doing that for a while.
No, I know. But see, again, this is. I think there's something about this. What's happened over the last several months that is a call to artists to say, okay, that's what it was then. Don't measure yourself by that anymore. With people getting together on Zoom and doing readings. I think that can be the beginnings of a new form. For example, and now here's a very kind of arcane reference, but in the French theater, I used to joke that, mime started because no one could understand French anyway. But there's but there was something to that. All the great comedian troupes that came to France were Italian. They did the Italian comedies. And the French actors at the time did this very vocal, speechified sort of classics. But everyone was going to see the comedies. And so they didn't want to make it easy for these Italians to come and do it. And so they couldn't speak. They made a law that they couldn't speak, and they had to enter on their hands because they were acrobats. Then they were acrobatic troops. They do those two things, and then they could do a play, right? They could do their stuff. And so silent mime got its start, and it became its own form. I think the same thing is true with what's going on now. This is just the reality. We need to find a way to build around it. And I'm going to give a plug to my friends at Grupo Ponto BR, which is I can't remember. I'm having a mental lapse right now. But the Brazilian theater company in New York is doing a show about the work of a very famous Brazilian writer named Clarice Lispector. And they're doing it online, and they're allowing you to go through a house and pick out the rooms you're on online in a sort of cinematic way. I haven't seen it yet, but I've heard about it. And I think they're not letting the pandemic get in the way of their plans. So they are taking what they have and doing the best with it, and maybe creating something quite interesting. And I think that we're all going to be a little bit like that.
Totally. So, absolutely.
But I would like, I'm hoping there's a couple film projects that are kind of floating around out there that I'm interested in, for, friends that are doing, and if things return to normal, maybe I can do that. But I would love to work in the kind of relationship with the director and a team and do some of that.
So it's like the collaboration aspect, like collaborating with other creatives, with other artists, with other people.
Yeah, and I have two scripts of my own that I'm still working on. The one is that script I worked on down here years ago, and then there's another one I would like to revise, which is also another one of these challenging things. It's set in Sri Lanka, but I think I need those difficult things, and it might I might not be the obvious choice to take on these stories, but especially in movies, you find the team to get together to change your original conception and make it authentic and so on. But these are just projects that are there. But in the meantime, I'm doing the thing that I can do, which is, since I'm in Brazil and I have a microphone with me, I'm going to go and find that next person to talk to, and maybe it would spring something. And I want to write some stories down here too. I want to see what happens.
Is there like a common theme throughout like just your work and the stories? Like I remember once reading that Sherwood Schwartz, who created Gilligan's Island and Brady Bunch, he always said that basically writers kind of tell the same story over and over again, you know, like what, and that's the story that most, you know, that's most important or was most life affirming to that particular person, right? So using Sherwood Schwartz, for example, Gilligan's Island's a bunch of people who get stuck on an island and have to figure it out, right? Then he wrote the Brady Bunch, and it's a group of people from different backgrounds, you know, from different places who are stuck together in a house and have to figure it out. Is there kind of like is there like a common thread in the stories that you tell that you've identified?
It's a really good question, and I've said that very thing to people, that, you know, a writer is fixated on one story. It just seems to be a bunch of different stories. I think Shakespeare is definitely like that. I think Shakespeare, all Shakespeare's stories are conspiracies. They're all conspiracy stories. They're all conspiracy theories. They're all, you know, if you want to find someone who's whacked out crazy conspiracy theory, William Shakespeare is the king of them all, because you could find the people and go, what? You think Romeo and Juliet are going to run off together and she's going to pretend to die? What a conspiracy theory. So, they're all conspiring. I mean, you look at the lightest comedy, there's some sort of hidden conspiracy somewhere. Anyway, so that's Shakespeare. For me, I do think it is this notion of change, evolving, and finding out what is latent inside of a person that has not appeared yet. I mean, I think that's kind of what I look at my life and what kind of has dictated the course of my choices. And I think that's kind of it, that there is something latent, not in just me, but in everybody, that is still waiting there to kind of find a form, you know, and trying to find its way out. And you're not going to know what that is until you go through some sort of, maybe, as I say, this idea of getting kind of knocked sideways. You know, if it were not for that, you know, this other part of you would never emerge. And I mean, it's kind of an old, you know, trope, you know, that the you know, it takes a sort of a trauma for, and not doesn't have to be a trauma, but it's something that compels you to move ahead and to change. I mean, metamorphoses is changing form, and that's the same thing you just mentioned. Is that you know, there's nothing that. They're not really different varieties. It's all the same impetus, and they just continue to change into something new, and conform to the circumstances that exist. And I think that that is what is fascinating to me, as it is to find that. Now, I don't want to think about it too much because it might affect what I'm trying to do. I don't want to write for the theme, but I do know that. Even in Cecilia's story, I was telling my girlfriend here that there's something that Oscar Wilde says in The Portrait of Dorian Gray, that, you know, the portrait painter is not painting the portrait of the sitter, he's painting a portrait of himself. And I think that is also true as well, is that hearing Cecilia's story, you know, I think it's very interesting about this notion she talks about at the very end. You know, she's going out on this airplane trip to New York City by herself, and she knows that if she starts out on this trip, that she's going to arrive. She's going to get there, but you have to start. You know, and then I go, well, that's kind of sounds like me in a way, but I think you have to take that moment where you put yourself in an uncomfortable position. And not in a sort of a sadistic or masochistic kind of way, but I think that's the nature of artistic form. You know, you decide this thing that doesn't allow you to do exactly what is easiest. You have to work at it. You have to do your scales. You have to learn your scales, and by negotiating all those difficult things, you find yourself doing something you never thought you would have done before.
Hi there, it's Jordan Van Haslo. Thanks for listening. I hope you had as much fun as we did today. Before you go, be sure to like today's conversation and subscribe so you never miss another. Also, follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Showtime with Jordan for breaking news and unaired behind the scenes. And don't miss us live every Monday at 11 a.m. Pacific on Hot 702.5 FM Las Vegas. See you next time for another Showtime with Jordan Van Haslo and friends.